when I used to cover presidential campaigns day to day, if the candidate gave his or her stump speech, same every time with message discipline, the political reporters would all be bored. They'd say to their editors, "There's no news today," so you get no coverage, right? But if you deviated from your stump speech, they'd say, "Oh, we've got no message discipline." That's true of every candidate. Donald Trump has a special place in this dynamic because if he goes to Iowa and he stays largely on message, which he did yesterday. Now, there were digressions, but he mostly talked about affordability, talked about his record on the economy, talked about other things he wants to do. And then towards the end of the speech, he did other stuff. It gets almost no coverage. Fox cut away from it. Fox was covering it live. Now, if he had spent the whole speech attacking the squad and talking about Iran, they probably would have stayed with it, and he probably would have gotten more coverage in the news today. So this is kind of quandary. And at the same time, if you look at all the data, the president is not winning the messaging wars. They have this big event at the White House today to talk about the economy and these Trump accounts. But look at the new number on consumer confidence. This is kind of startling for those in the White House who think everything's going to be fine. This is number 113, please. Lowest level of consumer confidence in, what is it, a decade? I think it's a decade, lower than during COVID.
2014, I think.
Yeah, that's like a decade lower. The 2014, lower than during COVID. America's confidence in the U.S. economy falls sharply in January to the lowest level since 2014. I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to understand why people would think that. We can theorize all we want. Is it AI? I don't know what it is. But it's grim for the president and for Scott Bessent. So here's Scott Bessent, Mr. Sunny. Mr. Optimistic, Mr. It's all going to work out. We've set the table, and 2026 is the year of the buffet. Here he is talking to Fox News about his view of turning things around on consumer confidence. This is number 119, please.
But consumer confidence is pretty low right now. Do you think we're going to see those numbers turn around when people start getting those refund checks back?
Well, I think we are. And in my private investment career for 35 years, I always learned to be skeptical of the numbers when, so that's a sentiment survey. What people are actually doing is more important. So we're actually seeing consumer spending is quite strong, job growth is quite strong. So I think we will see the survey numbers start picking up. I think 2026 is going to be a great year. I'm also the IRS commissioner, so I could see that we're probably going to have between another 100, 150 billion of refunds, a lot of that going to working families based on the president's signature policies: no tax and tips, no tax and overtime, no tax on Social Security, deductibility of auto loans for American-made cars. So it's going to be a big refund season. Working Americans will reset their withholding, and I tell everyone, do have a look at your withholding. So that will give you a weekly fill-up or monthly fill-up in wages. So I think we are containing costs, but more importantly, we're going to see real wage gains for working Americans.
Okay.
Now, one more element, 112, please. The FT says that you can put up Melania. We'll just watch it. I don't know that we need the audio. Just leave the picture up for those on listening on the podcast. There's Melania Trump on the familiar location with great branding behind her for her film. Do they always have that branding behind the people when they do ring the bell?
Yeah.
They do?
With corporate,
right.
Yeah, corporate.
Corporate logo is always back there. Yeah. All right. Anyway, she's ringing the bell, opening bell down on Wall Street there. FT says, I guess we can't put this up. I'll just read it. Investors are betting on a hot U.S. economy headed into the midterm elections. There it is. Investors bet on a hot U.S. economy heading into elections. Stocks rise with inflation expectations as fund managers anticipate more stimulus despite strong growth. Now, that's separate from what the Fed's going to do. And of course, the dollar is very weak now. The president yesterday did not talk up the dollar, quite the contrary, unlike what most presidents do. That's not messaging for the general public who doesn't much care about the value of the dollar, but in the financial world, that's a big deal. So, Hogan, you first. There's these two elements, right? There's the question of how the president messages, and if he goes out and talks about the economy, the press doesn't cover it, so it's a tree falling in the woods. And at the same time, the White House can't look at that January consumer confidence number and be pleased that they're on track. So I put all that in the blender, and what do you get?
Well, real quickly, having done comms for Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, I would always find it fascinating at the back of the room, as you said, when we do joint appearances with other candidates, Romney, for example, I mean, the reporters just sitting there bored out of their minds, just like typing away, talking to each other. And then when like Huckabee would get up and speak or Rick Santorum, they looked like cracked out, meth heads because they never knew what was coming. They were always worried and harried trying to get through it because they never stayed on message. It was always a different speech every time. But as far as this is concerned, listen, I think you got to be careful here because you don't want to message something that's antithetical to what the people are feeling. I think this is the problem that Kamala Harris had and the problem that Joe Biden had. The difference, though, was Kamala was telling you the border was closed when it wasn't, that the economy was better and it wasn't. Crime was down, but it wasn't. They were flat out lying. The difference here is Trump has some pretty good numbers in certain areas, but you have to at least let the people in that you understand what they feel is still difficult. And that while they've made strides, you need to let them know, here's where we were, here's where we are now. And the trajectory is only going up if you allow us to keep hold of the House, the Senate, and the White House. It has to kind of be a combination of those messages. But the Bill Clinton ubiquitous, I feel your pain, should be part of that, I believe, as well, moving forward in talking about these issues, because the American people are struggling for sure.
Kevin, we've seen
Hogan, can I ask you though? Do you think that last part about Bill Clinton? I feel your pain. The president is so wired to just be a cheerleader, right? And to accept that nothing is wrong. People aren't. And he gave that speech at the Kennedy Center where he said, I don't understand why the American people aren't feeling this way. Do you think he has the capacity, having worked for him, to acknowledge that kind of pain that some people are feeling, or is he just going to be that cheerleader that is pretty effective, right, and has been effective in the past?
Well, first of all, it's the Trump Kennedy Center, so let's make that very clear. Second is, yes, but he doesn't do it in the typical way a politician does it. Instead of saying, I feel your pain, or having Mike Huckabee get off a stool famously and look at a lady whose children had cancer and say, I can't imagine how I would feel if my child had cancer, and get in there like that. He's more of a, look, it was rough, but he would say something like, Joe Biden ruined your lives. He ruined the economy for 4 years. I know it's tough, but I'm fixing it. We have prices down. We have this. He'll go into his mantra, but he'll remind you who caused that pain, as opposed to him saying, hey, I know it's rough out there. I get it, right? He's not going to say it, I think, in those ways. Yeah. Both effective, and I think both work.
Kevin, let me ask you. So Bessent, publicly and privately, is betting on the economy roaring by the spring, and being able to run on promises made, promises kept. That's not impossible, and there's some economic data that suggests maybe even more likely than not. So if you're sitting around with Chuck Schumer and Ken Farmer, like, what do you do as the Democrats in case that happens? Just continue to cherry pick the negative stuff? I mean, in other words, if your whole thing's on the economy's weak, and then the economy turns out not to be weak, how are Democrats preparing for that possibility?
Yeah, it's a good question. Weak to who, right? I mean, it's still going to be the case that 40% of Americans, even if the economy is booming, still can't afford a $500 medical bill.
Unexpected bill
and stuff like that, right? So that gap is still real. It is the issue of what middle class folks are feeling, especially suburban voters, right, that are not making a fortune. They're around 100K a year. How are they feeling? And again, everything is going to be locked in come the spring to predict what people will how people will vote in November. There's a very short amount of time for this administration to change course in people's mentality, because again, once you hit June, July, August, that mentality is going to be what dictates where people are in November.
They say that something that's easy is like a walk in the park. Well, easier than a walk in the park, hit the subscribe button, be part of the Two-Way community, never miss an episode, be part of our conversations. Thank you for your service to America.
And don't forget, you can now listen to the morning meeting and Two-Way Tonight on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.